So, first off, I'd love to start with a question. Let's start with you, Nikolai. On my mind always is how do we get more people to start to learn about and start to use SQL and FHIR and these technologies and standards that we developed? So, in your experience, and then we'll open up the rest of the group as well. What's your best advice for getting started with SQL and FHIR?
Good question. Hi guys. So my best advice, try to apply this technology to your real world problems. And what we see, it may solve some of them. So if you hit the limitation of fire search, or you need a lot of flexibility in working with your data, you want to join, you want to build some dashboards, some reports, some analytics, try to apply what we did in SQL and Fire. At least make a mental experiment how it could be applied. Maybe come to us and ask the question how I can apply it. And if you miss something, yeah, please report. If you could not do something with what we done, so please tell us and maybe we can fix it.
Yeah, I'll make another plug for our Zulip stream and chat. We have folks coming in all the time, every week almost, and saying, I'm interested in SQL on Fire. I have this specific problem. I have this use case. Maybe I've tried to do some work in this space, and can you look at my demo and maybe give me some advice and recommendations? So terrific. And there's a lot of open source options now, right? From some from vendors, some from individuals, but you saw things like Flatquack, which unfortunately Dan could not join us today, but to me that's a really exciting one, really powerful columnar analytics. So any other advice from the group on how to get started? Gene, I know you're, kind of a more recent convert to SQL on Fire. What was your experience?
I just love the community effort to really make something that has been such a pain point for a lot of companies and I think a lot of organizations. And the tremendous progress that has been made by this group is just incredible. And once we get to a future where view definitions are, shareable and easy, everybody can just take those and avoid themselves a lot of, rework that has to happen by everyone. So I think it's a hugely important effort, and I just commend everybody in this group for driving this forward and really glad to be a part of it as well.
Well, of course. Thank you, Gene. Yeah, we're glad to have you too. I think that rolls in a little bit to maybe the next question. What are you most excited about looking forward to 2026? There's been so much great work that we've shown over the past 2 days, but the future is very open and exciting. So I'd love to have a number of us answer that question. Maybe Steve, would you be? I know you're doing lots of great work in the space, really applying it in real organizations. What are you excited about in 2026?
I think no discussion of the future would I think that the topic of AI is definitely going to be on the minds of everybody. I think you've seen some great examples. Gene, I saw your presentation. Bashir, I had to jump off, so I'm looking forward to seeing yours as well. We've been doing a lot of work in the AI space as well. With AI here, what we're seeing, at least in our business, is new projects that were previously not possible for a variety of reasons, cost or complexity, are now being brought to the table as now possible. So we're doing a lot of work in that space because of strictly because of AI. That's sort of one side of what I think AI is opening up for us. You're also seeing this idea of wanting to go from natural language to a result, right? In a variety of different capabilities. I think a lot of us are working on that. We're certainly working on that, Gene and Bashir, and there's a lot of people working on that. So we're excited to continue that effort, both with some of our project work, but also publicly as well. I think of a lot of the parts and pieces and infrastructure and standards that are everybody's working on are working in that direction. So I think that's exciting too. Yeah.
Terrific. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree, to be honest. So I think that AI, what I see now, that many people who didn't program now can start programming using agents. And we know there is a lot of content about SQL and all this stuff, so agents very well trained to write the queries. And what I see that we really can liberate the data for non-programmers, probably up to physicians. I don't know. We just have to provide some security and safety framework for them to trust the results. But that's maybe very amazing. And I see how people starting programming around me who never program, and they enjoy it. And I hope the physician will join us as well. So our researchers, they now it's the cost of this become much less than it was. Yeah, you don't need a human expert for that.
Yeah, that's exciting. In some ways, that's been the promise for some time of some of these technologies, right? Gino is laughing, but uh, there's been this idea that, given this standard, given this language or specification, that, clinicians or domain experts will not have to become programmers, but can express their questions or create software essentially with natural language. And I think, we're just maybe on the turning point to see that. So I was going to ask a question about AI, coming up, but maybe we open up some of the AI discussion. So yeah, in terms of what you're looking forward to in terms of AI, I mean, maybe we can frame it this way. Like, this is the second annual conference, the third annual conference, next winter, next fall, next winter, maybe looking back, where do you think we'll advance in terms of AI, particularly around FHIR analytics? So John, I see you're off mute. You want to go ahead?
Maybe we won't even have to deliver the conference. No, I'm just kidding.
We're all agents.
Yeah, I think SQL FHIR is useful for AI for some of the same reasons that it's useful for humans. We don't want, for performance reasons, we don't want to make AI do lots of complicated work unflattening FHIR over and over when that work is actually reusable. So it's about like chopping that task into multiple pieces and leveraging reuse and giving AI anchors so that it can actually perform reliably and reproducibly in the tasks that you're asking it to do. Yeah, I think I have a similar level of enthusiasm to others on the call. We recently had a kind of conversational interoperability day, kind of trying to reproduce what Josh created at the Connectathon, but internally at CSIRO. And one of the things that we did was we built like an MCP server over Pathling, and gave it the ability to sort of have a data set, a set of SQL and FHIR views over that data set, and create an agent which had access not just to the ability to query those SQL and FHIR views through Pathling, but also access to like a sandbox where it can run arbitrary R code, right? So what you get out of that is you give the agent the ability to do sort of arbitrary queries and aggregations over your data, and you give it the ability to run arbitrary R code, and suddenly you're at the point where you can get it to answer sort of arbitrary analytic questions really quite well. Okay, give me a statistical report on why, on whether sort of elderly people are spending more time in the hospital or whatever it is. And it can actually just go off and orchestrate that task given the tools that it has. So it's really pretty amazing. And I can just imagine that that's just going to get better and better, that sort of thing.
I completely agree. Go ahead, Graham.
So I just want to jump in. I want to deal with a question that came up on the chat on the webinar. The question is, what's their opinion on using OpenAir for storage and FHIR for exchange? Do still need SQL on FHIR when you can use AQL? So we're having a really good collaboration with the OpenAir community at the moment, and we're building out infrastructure at the moment. But a OpenAir storage system is even more nested than a FHIR storage system. And AQL is a good query language for extracting pieces of data, and it works really well in the context of an application. But if you're going to do data analytics, back to the same structural challenge. So I think that the SQL on FHIR, the view definition, will be proved very applicable. And I'm hoping that when we've dealt with some of the more pressing structural stuff, we can get to having an engagement around how you would use view definition in the context of OpenAI's data store.
Great, thanks.
Can I add a
Yeah,
few comments to that question as well?
please.
Because these domain-specific languages like SQL, AQL, they're good, yes, but they are not supported by a lot of vendors, and there are not so much technology around. Yes, what we are trying to do, we want to build a bridge between existing database and SQL ecosystem, which is really huge, and there is a lot of investment in there. So, and it would be hard to reproduce the same in AQL land or in a SQL land. So here we're a little bit like tricking, but that's why I believe that SQL is a solution. So
Yeah, and I think
I completely agree with that.
I think the portability aspect of it too, the reproducibility and portability is an important note too. We can ask AIs to do the things, we can ask teams to do the things. The rate you get them is just different. But if you give 10 different engineering teams a pile of data and ask them to develop their own, give them the requirements for your analytics, they're going to do the unnesting differently. They're going to do, make some different choices along the way. And that's true with AIs too. They just do it faster. And so being able to say, no, this is the canonical way we do the unnesting and all these other things is going to lead to better results, whether you have AI doing it or engineers doing it. And so I think that piece needs to be, there's a lot of things asking in the chat about reproducibility and all that. And I think that's an important piece of it is saying, well, at least we're starting from the same point further in the stack instead of just the original source data.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wanted to have the panel talk a little bit about reproducibility aspects. I mean, because you can talk about AI like we've been talking about, but it's that lack of determinism should give everyone funny feelings, right? Particularly when they're talking about things like clinical data, data analytics. And so I think that's a really valid question to have, right? And you're touching on it, Gino, but maybe I'll open it up to the group a little bit. Like how I think each of us, I'm pretty sure, is working on some AI aspect here, through our professional work or our, open source work. How are folks thinking about the kind of reproducibility problem and what approaches are people taking?
Yeah, maybe I mean, I know there is a lot of excitement about AI, and I am excited as well. I'm actually working in this space too. But my actually worry, I mean, beside reproducibility, my worry is that I'm a little bit in general, I'm a little bit skeptical about these language models and stuff because I feel nobody exactly understands how they work. So they, exactly, this generating next token probability, then it turns out to something this big. So I'm afraid that in the space of healthcare, too early, these kind of tools are put in front of end users, like practitioners and clinicians. And yeah, I mean, and the engineers who have created this, they don't fully understand, the safeguards and everything. And in the space of healthcare, that can lead to, very undesirable outcomes. One other points about what Nikolai mentioned, because there was also a question on the QA, and I want to second that being able to tap into the SQL space is actually very important because it's huge and there are a lot of tools, especially this is analytics on FHIR conference, working doing work in the analytics space. It's actually very important to be able to use SQL. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Graham.
I told my daughter when she was 6 that she wouldn't have to learn to drive.
Yeah.
And presto, she's now a driver with a license. And she said something to me about that the other day. Dad, you said I wouldn't have to learn to drive. But we're in the case where self-driving cars are safer than human driving cars, right? I mean, it's not like orders of magnitude safer, but it's safer. I mean, the data's become pretty clear now. But how many self-driving cars do we have? It's been a long time
Yeah.
before we're ready to use AI fully in healthcare, and it's not to do with the tech.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about. I was at a medical society conference 2 weeks ago, and there's some really interesting approaches now to these kind of, I won't go into details what the company was doing, but essentially using these systems of LLMs, but asking very specific questions on structured data like pathology reports. Instead of saying, okay, well, tell me, what this pathology report is saying, it's saying, break down the problem, say in a quality measure, right, into much, much smaller problems and use LLMs to apply to specific questions like, is this, the specific type of cancer, listed in this report? And then the evaluation side, I think, is super critical, right? Are you comparing human abstraction versus LLM abstraction? And they did a really good bit of work with the American College of Pathology comparing gold standard human abstractors of unstructured pathology reports to their system. So I thought that was really impressive. And, it's really what Graham, to your point about drivers, right? What are you comparing against? I think this is going to be more and more vital to us. And so it'd be interesting for us as a community to think about, how we can help support that evaluation component into the future. So we got a couple of minutes left. One thing I wanted to talk about before we ended was, there's a lot of folks who are on the call who are new to SQL on Fire, and they're, thinking about their use cases. And I said in my introduction, like, I would love personally for 2026 to be, the year of the Fire analytics use case. I think we spent, 2024 working through some of the difficult questions, developing, the initial specification. 2025, I think we've seen a lot of great implementations and then linkages with the other parts of the FHIR ecosystem, meaning the FHIR API, library-based query resource for clinical reasoning. And now I think really what I'm obsessed with is focusing on applying what we've developed into specific use cases, real world use cases. So I'd love to open it up to the group to talk a little bit about what use cases you're seeing kind of in the industry through your conversations. Where do you see the demand side, I guess we'd say, for use cases, and where you would like to see us develop in terms of really specific applications in specific use cases? So how about Nikolai?
Yeah. I biased into the development of HR-like systems, and I think that SQL and SQL on Fire providing a lot of flexibility and power to start building Fire first or Fire native systems. So I see this trend, and it's getting more and more people who deciding to modernize or just write from scratch on a Fire basis. I know it wasn't intended, so the Fire was initially the standard to exchange information, but it's very nice side effect. And I believe that these tools we are providing gives even more flexibility for the people to build Fire native system. That is what I believe to see more.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? Steve?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this because we've been focusing on exactly that question. Where is the demand for this? And we've done a lot of work to interview people, in the trenches, in hospitals predominantly, to try to figure out where they're getting blocked. There's incredible demand for all the tools that we've been talking about. For example, we interviewed, I think it was about 20 or 30 chief nursing officers, and how they are struggling, quite frankly, to get a lot of analytic questions answered that deal with safety, deal with revenue, deal with care. And it was not uncommon to have them answer. We have an analytics team, in-house analytics team, but we're dealing with a 1 year plus queue of data analytics projects. There's sort of a never-ending list of questions, analytic questions for that team, and it's often hard to get that work prioritized. So I think there's your demand right there. I think there's a huge opportunity and market for this, and I think everybody who's on this call and certainly who's attended the conference over the last couple of days has that in mind and are trying to work towards addressing that demand.
Yeah, it's a great example, and that's not maybe the primary example that a lot of people think of, but yeah, I could see how incredibly relevant and impactful in the real world, right? I mean, this is truly impactful work in the real world. So thanks for that. Anybody else want to jump in? Gene, I think you might have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, sort of provide an example of there are many healthcare organizations out there that have looked at FHIR before, maybe 5, 6 years ago, and they decided that it was not for them, or it was too complex. And I think what SQL on FHIR does is serve as a bridge for those type of organizations where they can see how it fits into their existing implementation, their existing analytics stack, where it's not just a point solution, it's integrated and it works out of the box. So that's what I see happening a lot in 2026 is really coming together of the legacy world and the FHIR world, and a lot of organizations getting on board where they were maybe sitting on the sidelines at this point. And we obviously have a lot of regulatory changes coming to a head as well, with CMS 0057 and the quality digital measure transition. So we have a lot of impetus for organizations to get involved and kind of get off the sidelines.
Yeah, terrific. I was going to make that point if anybody is if no one's going to make it as well. Obviously, we have a global audience, but in the United States, we have the CMS 0057 prior authorization regulations coming out. We have the major digital quality transition over the next 5-ish years. That's a huge driver for FHIR analytics because, digital quality measurement is essentially analytics in my view. And then other things I think that are one step beyond that or before that that are really critical, that where we have these gaps that we haven't quite filled in, which are things like, I know, Gene, you're very interested in data quality as well on FHIR. I think that's just an essential component. So I'd love to see applications of the work that we're doing for that use case as well. Hopefully some of these use cases are relevant and resonating with some of the folks in the audience. And if I can make another pitch, not to sound like a broken record, but come talk to us about it. We're a completely open group, completely vendor neutral. Some of us are in academic organizations, some are in commercial organizations, but we meet every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So come check us out on Zulip. We would love to just chat with you and chat about your use case. So you can basically get all the minds on this call and others to help talk through your use cases with you. So I know that there's a decent amount to sort of get to know and understand about SQL on FHIR, but I would definitely make a pitch to read the specification, try out some really zero cost ways of playing around with SQL on FHIR, and then just start to think about how you might apply SQL on FHIR to your specific use case, and then come talk to us. That would be my recommendation for my first question. So terrific. Yeah, any other thoughts on use cases you're particularly interested in seeing develop over the next year to the panel? Gino?
Yeah,
I know,
I think
I know
just
Gina
to,
want to provide database of FHIR metadata as a tabular stuff, yeah?
Yeah, Gino, why don't you talk about
I can talk about that quickly before just jumping back to some of the things that Steve and Gene were talking about. I think one of the things, and I don't know if 26 is the year or if that would be more in 27, but democratizing the work that goes into those use cases and being able to make that portable and say, I can develop my analytics pipeline and not worry about, oh, if I change this piece, I have to redo all these 5 years of work and things like that. And I think that's an important thing to think as you're building up your tooling and doing these projects, even if you're not using SQL on FHIR today. If you can make your partners and everything use these standardized pieces, then you give yourself more flexibility in the future. The use case Nikolai was bringing up is just talking about kind of the level down and talking about spec generation and code generation and getting access to all of these components. And Graham has some of that in IG Publisher, but we found that there's a lot of tooling that builds on top of that and does a lot of extra things with all of the published packages, with the core spec itself, being able to figure out how you do value sets and code systems and elements and bindings and types and all those things. And it's the similar type of problem as we have in FHIR in general, that it's very nested and hierarchical, and things are just listed in arrays instead of giving indexes and things like that that make it very hard to work with. So I have a lot of tooling, and I'm trying to finish the tooling before I go back and make sure all the definitions are right, but that we can hopefully publish then just databases that have all of this and make them available to people. Whether you're using SQLite, there's actually not that much content, so you can load it locally. The biggest problem there is keeping it updated with every new publication. And so being able to publish these endpoints, and same thing, then give access for MCP, give access to LLMs, do these different pieces that can see inside all these packages with all their definitions, and kind of take a lot of that time-consuming work, whether it's for you or for the LLM, and just put it in a table.
Yeah, that's super useful work for people within the standard space, but I think also people getting into the standard space. Nikolai, did you have a comment?
No, it's amazing. So imagine you can query like any IG, how FHIR is used, I don't know. And definitely the LLM can use this information, to decide on profiles, on view definition, if we will provide this huge meta database with the FHIR definitions. I can imagine a lot of tools built around that. And I'm really interested, Bashir and John, what's on your plate here?
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear it.
So in my case, I have recently started to focus more on that MedGemma that I mentioned at the end of my presentation. And what excites me, I mean, some of the models, like recent models, I don't want to promote models. So some of the non-open weight models are actually doing fairly well understanding FHIR resources. So, and I mean, to be honest, I have been actually amazed. You can throw a lot of FHIR resources at the context and then ask a very specific question, like, what was the last drug that, the user, the patient had before this diagnosis or something like that. And that can answer it. So MedGemma is a much smaller model, but it's an open weight model. So that's the part that excites me, because it's, everybody can use and deploy. So that's one of the areas that I'm focusing to make MedGemma also understand FHIR well.
Yeah, so the sort of things that we're working on are, what can we do to really integrate this with the bulk data ecosystem and also accelerate the bulk data ecosystem? So, we've already got bulk export that's pretty widely implemented. I'm participating in the bulk submit connectathon just coming up, which is like the import side of things, and getting over some of the technical barriers to implementation of bulk data. I think then that's like a key enabler of this as well. So I can imagine, like, when we've got sort of data freely flowing from, say, primary care to training for clinical decision support and then back to primary care, that sort of thing. And I think a sort of parallel trend is like the whole AI scribe trend, where we've got this huge amount of data now being generated from AI scribes. And how do we get that into a structured form that we can do interesting things with? And then how do we make it easy for people to build on top of that? I think SQL and FHIR is actually, it can be a key part of that as well. So I see that as like just this huge new source of data that it's kind of our job to figure out how to harness it and make sure it doesn't just become this giant blob of unstructured data that can only be interpreted by agents. I mean, like, it's great if you create if you capture all this data using a scribe, there's lots of data there, and an LLM can make lots of use of it. But let's face it, we're not going to put an agent in front of every single thing in healthcare. We need to actually get that into structure so that we can use it for things like clinical decision support and analytics. And then things like SQL and FHIR become very important as a key enabler of making it, lowering the cost of actually doing that, I think.
Terrific. Yeah, I love the word that Gino brought up, which is democratize. And, thinking about SQL on Fire from not just a technical perspective, but, kind of a product or market perspective, that's always been my driving force, is to reduce the costs, to increase the standardization such that we can democratize it, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of the financial aspects as well. Because I think that's really critical, and that's where the blocking step has been, or at least one of the major ones. So with that, we are just at time, so I want to say thank you to all of our panelists and all of the presenters for the second annual SQL on Fire conference. And if I can make one last pitch, please, if you're in the audience, come visit us. We meet like this weekly. Basically, you have like a weekly session with most of the folks who are on the call. We are extremely happy to have new folks join and help out in any way. And we're very interested in folks coming and joining with us, and we're happy to help in any way. So thank you for attending. I hope you learned a lot. We will be sharing out all of the session recordings and all of the presentations via email, and we'll make it easy for you to access all that content. So, all right. Well, thank you again, and hope to hear from you soon. So thank you from all of us.
Thank you, Arjun, for driving us. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Arjun.
you.
Thanks,
Thanks all.
everyone. Thank you. Thank you.